Welcome to a Sasha Responds video where I respond to your questions and comments that were left here in YouTube. These questions are selected by my producer, not by me, and so I'm going to take a look at the question for today and just give you my off-the-cuff response. So let's have a look. Okay, so today's question and comment comes from Raguj874. So Raguj says, generally, I agree, but why are you so worried about transgender medical intervention? But you said no word about cisgender people getting gender-affirming care like fake boobs or genitalia surgery. Why an adult trans person has to go through complex or complicated processes, and at the same time, cisgender people can do every surgery they want without examination or diagnosis to prove they don't have any body dysmorphia. Okay, so this is a very common question and maybe criticism I think that people have when people talk about the importance of, taking it slow in gender therapy or the gatekeeping question, right? I think a lot of people do have the same question as Raguj. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think the starting point for me here is that there are fundamentally different risks involved with surgeries like breast implants, for example. And when Raguj says genital surgeries that are supposedly gender affirming, I'm not sure what this person means by that. Let's just take an example of, a woman who gets a labiaplasty to make her genitals look more, I guess, aesthetically appealing, in air quotes, right? That's a complicated question, but if that's what you're talking about, right? There are fundamentally different outcomes and risks involved with that type of genital surgery or breast implants for a biological woman versus the gender affirming interventions like taking hormones or having, mastectomy, top surgery, or genital surgery for trans affirming care. Those are really, really different things. And I want to start out by saying I can totally understand why people don't make that distinction, because there are a lot of arguments, philosophical arguments, that sometimes advocacy groups or activists use to make it seem as though these things are exactly the same, right? And I think that's a big problem because, as I talk about all the time on this channel, when we're talking about reality, we're dealing in trade-offs. So the reality of what does it look like for, let's say you have a biological male person, okay, assigned male at birth person, to have a physically healthy body. There are certain hormonal levels that this person's body was built to operate on. And so it's not like you can just simply say, hey, my body is a completely neutral vessel, and I get to choose what hormonal balance I want. Do I want a masculine hormonal balance or a feminine hormonal balance? Gender medicine, of course, gives people those options. So I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying legally or even realistically. But when we're talking about why anybody would be a little more cautious or maybe a lot more cautious with gender medicine is that it takes a very serious toll on a physical male body to strip it of the natural levels and balances of testosterone versus, progesterone and estrogen, and adding those other hormones into the system. It's not the same thing as, even though I don't think this is a great idea either, let's say a male person who has body dysmorphia getting calf implants, right? That is a very different thing, even though, of course, all surgeries and all medical interventions do have risks. So I guess starting point number one is, if a person is going to embark on a process of really, really fundamentally changing their hormonal balance or changing, the ability of their bodies to do certain things. Like, for example, if a female person has what is sometimes considered a gender affirming bottom surgery of removing the uterus and ovaries, that fundamentally changes processes in this person's body that are kind of required for optimal health. So for example, if you took a female person, gender identity aside, right? We're talking about just the fact that we are human being mammals in reality. If you took a female person and she went to the doctor and discovered that her ovaries weren't working or her uterus had to be removed for some sort of medical emergency, this would be considered kind of a medical crisis. Not because, she needs her uterus to be affirming her feminine gender, but because her body requires for the hormones produced by the ovaries in order to be healthy and balanced and stable and disease-free as best as she can, right? So that's kind of point number one. And I think it's a really big problem when sometimes trans activists obfuscate this reality and make it seem as though, well, these are just characteristics and you can just remove them or you can add this or that hormone, as though there's no side effects to that and really serious complications. And I've worked with lots of people who, after years of hormone use, have had very complicated health problems, unfortunately, because of that. Now, it doesn't mean, again, that this is a choice people can't make. But to your question, Raguj, I think that fundamental premise is often missed by a lot of the gender-affirming kind of therapy procedures that take it very much at face value, that it's just simply a choice of do you want to go on the medical pathway that's masculinized or the medical pathway that's feminized? But in reality, we're dealing with trade-offs. So I think those are kind of all my main thoughts here. And, you can certainly look into this more if you would like to. My understanding, of course, I'm not a physician and I'm not a surgeon, but my understanding is that something like breast augmentation or labiaplasty is purely a kind of aesthetic, rearrangement. Now, of course, some people have complications from breast augmentation, but I think it's very, very rare. Whereas if you remove testicles, or if you remove ovaries or a uterus, those body parts play a really important functional role in the overall health and well-being of that person, especially as related to producing sex hormones that help keep their body in kind of a healthy, disease-free state as best as you can, right? We can all fall to diseases and illness. So I'm not trying to say that is a permanent way to make yourself healthy, but it is a big risk when you start to mess with the endocrine system, which keeps these things in balance. So, of course, you guys know I'm not a doctor. I am a therapist, but I do work in this area of gender identity and gender medicine. And I've come across a lot of people who have shared their experiences with me. And there are absolutely complications that come along with these types of interventions. So that is why I think it's much more important to be cautious and thoughtful, and for people to go into these procedures with a really clear understanding. So it's not about gatekeeping per se. It's about having a reality-based understanding of the trade-offs that you are embarking on. So I hope that makes sense, and I will see you guys in the next response video or next video. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to watch more, just click here. This information is meant for educational purposes only and not as a substitute for mental health services.